those breakout sessions where we will have discussion and get to know one another will not be recorded. So I wanted to let everyone know. We hope that you will engage via the chat, whether this is a meeting style, and so you can raise your hand if you have questions. Feel free to turn your video on if you so choose. And we really hope that this is an engaging and interactive session for you. So welcome. My name is Marissa Alberti. I work at the Education Trust. And welcome to our very first session in our series called Strategies to Solve Unfinished Learning. Today is all about setting the stage, thinking about what exactly do we mean by unfinished learning? What is this? And how do we start to tackle it together? This is specifically thinking about folks at the district level. How do we begin to tackle these issues together? And so this is the first of 6 sessions, and I'll go through at the end of the session the 6 topic areas that we're hoping to tackle. And so just a reminder, and I know I always forget, keeping your microphone off if you think about it, and making sure that you keep that off while you're not speaking. All right, so if you're not familiar with Education Trust, we are a national nonprofit, and we work to close opportunity gaps that disproportionately impact students of color, students from low-income families. And we do research, advocacy, outreach. Many of you probably are familiar with EdTrust through some of our briefs or research or papers that we've published, or even someone that you've interacted with. And so we're really excited to dig into this topic with you today. And so I already introduced myself. My name is Marissa Alberti. I'm a senior associate for national and state partnerships, and I'll be kind of steering this ship tonight. And then also joining me are Allison Rose Sokol and Kayla Patrick, and I'll let them really quickly introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison. Thanks for joining us. I'm the assistant director of our P12 at the national office at the Education Trust.
Hi, everyone. Kayla Patrick. I am a senior P12 analyst in the national office and happy to be with you all this evening.
All right, so really quickly, I said this is going to be interactive. And so I have this quote here: "There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about." And so I just wanted to acknowledge that each one of you joined today because you care about students and education, and in some way you're interested in what we have to talk about today. And so in the spirit of discovering what we all care about, if you haven't already, please write your name and the community that or school district that you represent, and then what you hope to get out of the time today. So your name, school district you represent, and what you hope to get out of today. All right, anyone in the chat? All right, Dana hopes to learn best practices from other systems doing the work. Welcome. Rodney from Louisville, welcome. Allison has a student in Montgomery County Public Schools. Nate from Urban League in Cleveland. Ramona from Newburgh School District. Learning about shared experiences and challenges, looking to gain strategies. All right, so keep them coming in as we continue, but it definitely see that people are here for different reasons, and we hope that today that for all of those reasons you are able to gather some insight and benefit from our session. So I'm going to go to the goals. This is going to be a lot of words on the screen. I will not read all of them. But the purpose of our workshop is helping advocates at the district level understand what is unfinished learning. I know someone in the chat just said, I don't want to understand what unfinished learning is. What are we talking about? So thinking about how do we address unfinished learning and meet the needs of students, both social, emotional, and academic. Building knowledge of funding and how federal funding can be used to tackle these issues. We hope to build your skill and capacity, so building your ability to advocate for these issues. And then we hope that we build community and people establish and strengthen relationships with one another. And I said earlier, we're going to be in breakout groups, and the hope is that you connect and be able to share even more with one another. And so again, today we're going to really dig into what is the current reality for students in our country, really investigate what is the American Rescue Plan funding, how it can be used to tackle unfinished learning, review some research. You're going to see some highlight best practices, and then we're going to have a conversation. And to answer your question, Michael, yes, this part is being recorded. So we will have this available afterwards, but the breakout sessions will not be recorded. All right, so we're going to get started. We just did the welcome. Allison and Kayla are going to dive into the topic and highlight some best practices. We'll do a breakout discussion, probably not for 30 minutes, and then we'll close out. I know folks on the East Coast got to get kiddos to bed and everything, so we will get started, and I'm going to kick it off to Allison.
Thanks, Marissa. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Okay, let's start with what is the American Rescue Plan and why are we talking about it? So, states and districts have gotten an unprecedented amount of money from the federal government to address all of the challenges that have come as a result of the ongoing pandemic. So this started in March of 2020. Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is called CARES, which provided an initial $30 billion. And then in December of 2020, there was another package that provided $82 billion for education. And then most recently, in March of 2021, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act, or as we'll sometimes talk about in this presentation, ARP, which provides almost $125 billion for K-12 education to states and districts. So you'll see it's the largest of the three packages. So throughout the presentation today, we'll talk generally about federal relief. We'll generally talk about it like that, federal relief, which means all of this money, but specifically, we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan because there are some opportunities and requirements with the money in the American Rescue Plan that are extremely exciting and relevant to the topic of unfinished learning. So how does the money work? So the money flows to states and then to school districts, and the formula that's used to figure out how much each state or district gets is based on the share of Title I money that states and districts receive under ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the most recent reauthorization of the big Federal Education Act, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Under the law, each state can keep up to 10% of the money that they receive, but at least 90% of that big chunk of money has to go directly to eligible school districts. So as you'll see in a second, we're talking about a dollar sign with a lot of numbers after it. There are some requirements for what that money has to be used for. Generally, states and districts have a great deal of flexibility with how they spend that money, with a couple of what I would consider to be really great exceptions. So in the American Rescue Plan Act, there are set-asides. The law says that states have to spend at least 5% of their amount, and districts have to spend at least 20% of their amount on evidence-based strategies to address unfinished learning. So I'm going to pause there because I already saw some people in the chat ask, what do you mean by unfinished learning? Why do you talk about it that way? So that term is EdTrust's preferred term when we're talking about the learning that students did not have the opportunity to engage in, certainly during the pandemic because of virtual and hybrid learning and a lot of challenges that families were facing, but also plenty of students had unfinished learning prior to the pandemic. So there's this big chunk of money to address this challenge, and there's also smaller set-asides for summer programs and after-school programs. And just as a quick note, states also have to meet, we won't get into this in detail here, but happy to connect with you later if you have questions about it. States have to meet what's called a maintenance of equity requirement, which means that if states or districts have to make cuts, either budget cuts or staffing cuts, they cannot disproportionately cut from high need districts and schools. This was a big equity win in the American Rescue Plan. So how much money is your state getting? That's right, the big question. So we have a map we've created on EdTrust website, and Kayla has put the link in the chat. So I'm going to encourage everybody to click that link and scroll down to the map and hover over your state. And it's going to tell you 3 pieces of information. It's going to tell you the very last number is the total amount of money that your state is getting in federal relief. And then the top 2 numbers are how much money your state at a minimum has to spend to address unfinished learning and how much money is flowing to districts in your state to address unfinished learning. So once you find your state, share it in the chat. How much money is your state getting? And if you are really in a sharing mood, I'm curious, is that exactly how much you thought your state was getting? Significantly more? But certainly, let's find the dollar amounts. I see Gabe has found that Ohio is getting $7 billion. Gabe, you're fast. Michael from Georgia found Georgia's getting $212 billion. Yes, Jonathan, I did spotlight Texas for you. Saw a lot of Texas votes coming, and I thought I'd be helpful. Give everybody another 30 seconds or so. Okay, Marissa, can you go to the next slide? So this workshop focuses specifically on strategies at the district level. So I'm sure a lot of you are asking yourself, okay, well, that's how much my state is getting, but how much is my district or my community getting? And how much of that money is going to flow directly to the students who I serve or advocate for, my kids, perhaps. So that answer, depends on where your district is and what state you're in. So this is an example of how to find that information. So many, but not all, states have somewhere on their website, though sometimes it's buried behind a couple of clicks, information on how much each district is getting. So this is Texas's information, usually called like district allocations. So you can see here in Texas that based on the formula, Dallas is getting 542, what is that? Trillion dollars? $1 million. And in ARP funds, it's late. Kayla's laughing at me. It's late. That's what happens when you do a webinar at 7 p.m. And so since at least 20% of that money has to be spent on evidence-based strategies to address unfinished learning, that means that Dallas has at least $108 million to spend on addressing unfinished learning. So we actually have started to dig to try to find the links for where you can find how much money your district is getting. And so we're happy to share those with you if you're curious and if you haven't already found that resource. So I just want to note before we get into the nitty gritty about what that money can be used for, that one of the things that is going to need to be top of mind is spending for long-term sustainability. So this is a lot of money and a big opportunity, but it does run out, as we're going to talk about in a second. And so it's really important that our leaders are thinking about how to plan for the full cost of strategies, how to use existing funding to stretch how far these funds can go, how to restructure time and people and money so that we don't have what's called a fiscal cliff in 2024 when the money runs out. So just some key dates and timelines about this big opportunity for states and districts. States have already received at least 2/3 of their American Rescue Plan dollars. To get that last third, the U.S. Department of Education has asked every state to submit a plan saying what they're going to do with their American Rescue Plan dollars. All states have submitted their plans, and almost all of them, 44, have been approved. Once states get their money, they have about 2 months to make sure that it flows to school districts. And then school districts have to do two things. Within 30 days of getting their money, they have to release a return to in-person instruction plan, which talks about how they're going to safely return kids to school buildings. And then within 90 days of getting their money, district leaders have to submit a plan to the state detailing how they're going to use that funding, including how they're going to use it to address unfinished learning. And as I mentioned before, the money has to be used by September of 2024. So why, before we talk about how to address it, why is unfinished learning a concern? How much of a concern is it? I suspect that because you've all chosen to join us this afternoon or evening that you know, at least anecdotally why, but I'll share a little bit of data. So the data is overwhelmingly showing that many, many students have significant unfinished learning that was exacerbated by the pandemic. This has disproportionately affected Black, Latino, and Native students. So this chart is from NWEA. It's data from across the country. And what you're looking at is a bunch of arrows pointing down, and it's showing the change in student scores from 2019 to 2021, so before the pandemic and after. And you can see that students' scores have fallen pretty significantly, particularly in math, and particularly in grades 3 through 5. And we see this pattern, Marissa, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, in states and districts across the country. So we're looking here at Ohio's proficiency rates. This is the change in proficiency rates from this school or last school year to before the pandemic. And you're seeing big drops, and you're seeing bigger drops for students from what Ohio calls economically disadvantaged homes. So students from low income backgrounds. And just as another example, because I can't do every state and district that you're all from, here's Montgomery County, where I live. Actually just released this data 2 days ago, which shows unfinished learning at the district level. There's a lot of numbers here, so I'll give you the big key takeaway. But these numbers are showing the percentage of students who scored at or above average on this MAP test that measures how much students have learned in math. And you can see that the dark blue is 2020 and the light blue is 2021. And particularly if you look in the lower left corner, FARMS is what Montgomery County calls students from low-income backgrounds. We have students, special education students and English learners, and you're seeing big gaps between the last school year and this school year. So I'm going to turn things over to Kayla to answer the question that I see popping up in the chat a lot, which is why do we talk about it as unfinished learning? Why that term? And she's going to share the research that really compellingly shows that while we have a big challenge facing us, there are lots of things that are incredibly effective and if implemented well, can make an enormous difference for students.
Great, thanks so much, Allison, and hello, everyone. I've seen lots of people wondering what unfinished learning is, and we at Education Trust have made a very conscious decision to use this language. And really what it is a term that describes what some people may call learning loss or gaps or learning gaps. What we really mean though is unfinished learning is the material that students should have been presented, but it hasn't been mastered yet. And that means that they didn't master it maybe because school buildings were closed, they couldn't access computers, lots of reasons. But as Allison mentioned, many students experience unfinished learning even before the pandemic. And so I really want to be clear that all students can learn. And so we really want to make sure that we're intentional about the language that we're using. And we're being clear that every student can learn with equitable opportunities, access to high quality materials, assessments, and instruction. Also really want to highlight with this phrasing that this is a systems issue and it's not a kid issue, right? So we really want to focus on the system and not fixing students. I hope that makes sense to you all, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. Next slide, please. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about is sometimes we use the word accelerate, and really we want to do that. And we don't mean to just put our foot on the gas and have students really speed through content. What we really mean by that is students should be offered opportunities to master these skills that they haven't yet mastered, while also being exposed to new content. And studies have shown that students of color especially benefit from acceleration rather than remediation. But too often, students of color, English learners, and students from low-income backgrounds are only offered remediation. And so that leads to way too many outcomes we don't want, like high school dropout and disengagement altogether. So we've done some level setting on language, and I want to jump into some of the strategies that we have identified with some research partners. About a year ago now, we identified the best strategies to get students back on grade level, and I'm going to walk you all through 3 of those strategies. The first is targeted intensive tutoring. This is sometimes known as high dosage tutoring. At a high level, what it is that a single tutor works with a student or a group of students every day, all year long, on academic skills. So what is really critical here is that we lead with equity. We always lead with equity at EdTrust. So this means that we are offering students a well-trained tutor, the same tutor, so that tutor has opportunity to build relationships and really get to know that student. That tutor should be working with less than 4 students at a time. Anything more than that is just not effective according to the research. And it's really critical that they're working on a skill-based, working with a skill-based curriculum that's aligned to what kids are already learning during the school day. That alignment is also critically important. We want to build on the skills that students are learning with their teachers, and not just introduce completely new skills to them. It should also be targeted to the students' needs, and we find out what students need by doing diagnostics or assessments and working with their classroom teacher to find out where those skills have not yet been mastered. And so one thing that we did, next slide, is put together a chart to really help folks understand what the most effective strategies are and what really leads to the most gains. And so what research shows is that certified teachers are really the best tutors we have for students. But as we know, that's not always possible. And so paraprofessionals are also really effective. And trained volunteers can be effective, but it's really important that they're getting that training before they become tutors. As I mentioned on the last slide, it's really important that tutors are working with students in the smallest group possible. So one-on-one is the most ideal situation, but probably not something that we can all offer our students. And so 2-to-1, 2 students with 1 tutor is probably the most efficient, but anything less than 4 students is effective according to the research. Skill building curriculum is way better than homework help. Homework help isn't really effective in getting kids to solve that unfinished learning. Another thing that's critically important is that students have access to tutors who were trained before they became tutors and that who are receiving feedback regularly and getting professional development as they grow in the tutoring program. And also a lot of tutoring programs now are being offered after school and summer school, but it's really critical that we do the best that we can to offer tutor during the school day when students are already in the school building. And that is the most effective strategy according to the research as well. We need to offer tutoring all school year. Every day is the most ideal, but that's not always possible. So as regularly as possible. And the research says that our youngest students gain the most from tutoring, but I really want to be clear that all students can benefit from tutoring. I'll talk a little bit today about a particular tutoring program that is targeted towards high school students. So many of you may be wondering about the cost of tutoring. It sounds really expensive, but it's not always that expensive, right? Even considering the amount of money that districts and schools are getting from the federal government. So I pulled a particular tutoring program that meets a lot of those equity and effective strategy bars that I showed on the last slide. And so this particular program focuses on teachers, teacher assistants. It has a pretty small tutor to student ratio. The curriculum is skill-based. They're offering that training and professional development on an ongoing basis. Students are receiving tutoring for 30 minutes daily throughout the school year, and this is for our youngest learners. And what we found is that this particular tutoring program is a little less than $900. Marissa, can you click the button, please? And so as an example of, just to give some context, Detroit Community Schools is receiving $3,000 per student from the ARP plan. That is more than enough money to cover something like tutoring. And so tutoring is a strategy that we can use with those ARP dollars that Allison was just talking about. Next slide. The second strategy is expanded learning time. So this is any program or strategy used to increase the amount of learning time that students have. And so this can be after school, summer school, and even in-school programs like double blocking would count as expanded learning time programs. The key equity consideration here is that that program must be aligned to what kids are already learning during the school day. So expanded learning time programs need to build on what students are learning in their core curriculum. It also needs to be targeted to students' needs, just like tutoring. Well-trained educators are really important. And here, small class sizes are also the most effective thing that we can do for these kids. And also, if you don't remember anything else from the slide, I hope you all remember that we just can't add more bad time onto a child's day, right? So we need to make sure that we're using the in-school class time as effectively as we can if we're going to expand the learning day in any way. So we really want to make sure we're giving kids high quality curriculum and instruction in any time during the school day or anytime we interact with them. So just like with tutoring, there's a chart in those briefs around expanded learning time and what the most effective strategies are. A lot of these things are very similar, right? We need to make sure that our educators are getting professional development, pre-service and ongoing, making sure that the curriculum is high quality and aligned, and making sure that it is, if at all possible, either during the regular school year or mandatory, right? It's really difficult to get kids back in the school buildings, either after school or summer school. So the most effective programs are actually double blocking or something that happens within the school day. There is such thing as too much time learning. And so we really want to hit that sweet spot and make sure that we're not just giving kids way too much time of just focusing on academics. And also, again, that class size is really critical here according to the research. Next slide. So thinking about cost for expanded learning time. The cost or the projected costs are a little bit higher here for expanded learning time than for tutoring. What you're looking at is a line chart, and the green line is the most effective expanded learning time program looked at by our friends at Education Resource Strategies. In this particular line, it shows that a district would have to spend $9,000 per student for a student to recover about 7.5 months of unfinished learning. So that's a little bit more expensive, but it can be effective. So I really like to always make sure I highlight this cautionary tale. Our friends in Florida passed a law several years ago, really requiring double blocks in reading. That is the ELT strategy. Unfortunately, they didn't see as many gains immediately as they thought. And that reason has been attributed to a lot of students weren't placed with a certified teacher, and they weren't placed in classrooms with small groups. And so that really goes to show you how important it is to really, as much as we can, follow the research and use evidence-based practices. And finally, I saw someone in the chat talk about how do we re-engage students and make sure that they're interested in learning. The most important thing that we can do is create strong relationships and build strong relationships with educators and staff members and other community members that really can mentor them and really emphasize the importance of school and understand their interests. So in our brief around strong relationships, some of these strategies are the same as you've seen in the last few strategies, right? We want to make sure that certified teachers, the teachers that are spending the most time with kids, are really trained to build strong relationships with their students. They should also be trained to identify students' goals and create activities to build on those goals to really gain their interest. And it's really important, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really focus on the social emotional well-being of students while helping to develop their academic skills. Those aren't two things that we do separately. We do them together as much as possible. And so that is the one thing that I really want to emphasize to everyone here tonight. So some of you may be wondering how in the world we're going to do these things. I know if you've seen any articles recently, there are lots of folks talking about how there's a shortage of educators, there's a shortage of time, and our friends at Education Resource Strategies have started to map out some alternatives for folks who are struggling with hiring enough tutors, for example. So one thing that I really want to emphasize is these things can be solved by either building relationships with external organizations. Lots of organizations have been ramping up and training tutors that we can really leverage in classrooms. Another thing that is really important is using scheduling, right? So there are districts and states giving training to school leaders around how to change their schedules to include tutoring or double blocking within the school day. So you don't have to hire additional teachers, you just use the teachers that you already have on staff. It's also really important to create time with for tutors and teachers to communicate with each other and to really learn about students' unfinished learning. And so these are just some of the strategies. I know it's a little hard to read. We'll make sure that we share these slides with you all. Promising practices. I'm going to talk a little bit about promising practices and things that we've seen from states, but I do want to emphasize we're in the early days of states and districts thinking about plans and what they're going to do with this money. And so we have identified places that seem to be on the right path. And so I'm going to share those with you all today. So one thing that we have identified that seems really cool is in New Mexico's plan to the Department of Education, they have said that they are going to create a Educator Fellow program. In this particular program, they're going to use their ARP money to hire 500 educators. And these are folks who are not yet teachers, but who may be looking for employment, and they're going to emphasize the importance of hiring a diverse group of folks, right? And the idea is that they're going to give these people a lot of a boot camp and training, and so that they can be essentially teacher assistants and ultimately become teachers. So it's a strategy to strengthen the educator pipeline, but also put additional bodies in classrooms so that they can be tutors for students. So they're basically doing two things at once. And so this is a chart that you may have seen familiar, that may look familiar to you at this point. And I'm going to ask Marissa to click a bunch of times to get us through. I've done some grading for this particular program. Wait, just give me 1 second so I can math through here. So first thing, this program does not include certified teachers, but what they are going to do is use the fellows to do the tutoring program in school. And so that is in the middle of the chart. They're somewhere in the middle of using an evidence-based strategy. So we would give them a star right here in the middle. And now you can click for the second thing. The student to teacher ratio, they have committed to making sure that tutors are tutoring students in a small group. So that's less than 4 students with 1 tutor at a time. They've also committed to a skill building curriculum. We haven't seen that curriculum, but I think they have said it's going to be high quality. They've also committed to pre-service training for those educators. So they're getting a gold star there. And one really important thing is making sure that tutoring is during the school day. It's all year, and it's for our youngest learners, but New Mexico actually does have a plan for high school students that is a little bit different. Next slide. So I also want to highlight legislation out of Colorado. Before the American Rescue Plan, Colorado passed a bill that would send money to districts to really require, to really implement these tutoring programs. And so the legislation requires small group tutoring. It requires those tutors to build that relationship throughout the year. They also require tutoring during the school day. So lots of things that we've talked about today are required in this legislation. And Colorado has committed to expanding this program with their ARP dollars. So making sure that low resource districts and districts that serve underserved populations really have an opportunity to take advantage of these extra funds to practice some of these strategies. And so really good model legislation out of Colorado. So let's talk about some district practices now. Forgot to add, I really wanted to share this language in Louisiana's plan. They have a plan called Accelerator that really is focusing on solving unfinished learning. But one thing that they have done is make sure that equity is at the center of this. So I'm going to give you a second to read what they said before we go into the districts. So really what the takeaway here is that they're making sure that everyone knows that we're working to address unfinished learning from an asset base, right? Every student brings gifts into the classroom, and we really need to make sure we celebrate that and their identities in order to build off of anything they haven't already learned. And so really good statement here from Louisiana. And in their plan, they use lots of language like this that I appreciate, and I think other states can also do. Next slide. So one tutoring program that I mentioned earlier, Saga, is being used across the country, and it focuses on high school level students, really helping to support them through advanced math. This program follows a lot of those evidence-based strategies that we talked about. Tutors are trained, they're tutoring in small groups, and they're working on grade level content and helping them to build on foundational skills. Really great impacts from this program. They've doubled or even tripled in some cases how much math students learned. And it's been adopted by districts and states across the country. And lots of states are interested in doing the Saga program statewide. So like the other states, I'm going to quickly run you through some of their promising practices. So their tutors are trained volunteers. They're not actually certified teachers. They're hitting the mark here on small groups. They're using a skill building curriculum. They're getting that pre-service training and that ongoing training. They make sure that it's during the school day, it's all year, and it's for older students. Next slide. Another program, I think Montgomery County has decided to contract with a program called TutorMe. It's a virtual tutoring program, and it's a little bit different than the other programs we talked about. Students have to request help to get matched with a tutor, and it's 1 tutor per student, so that is a good strategy, but lots of unknowns here. So let's quickly run through where they're meeting the marks and where they're not. Not a certified teacher. They are hitting the mark on where the tutor to student ratio. It's not a skill building curriculum, and that's really important, right? We're not sure about this pre-service and ongoing training. It's unclear from their website what kind of training these tutors are getting. Next slide. And it's after school, right? So kids are asking for homework once they get home. It's really not helping to connect with their learning during the school day. It's partial year, and it is for older students. I'm gonna hand it back to Allison now.
That chart is just so helpful for seeing the difference between Saga, which isn't, meeting the mark on every one of the indicators, but is doing such a good job. And then you see something like TutorMe, and it just makes it so clear where that is not necessarily going to.
So really quickly, Allison, try unmuting yourself, muting and unmuting again. You're a little robot,
How's it now?
It's good, I think.
Sorry, everyone.
Oh, it is not good.
How about now?
It's okay. I can, I'll go over this slide. Thanks. So one of our leaders, oh yeah, Natasha, if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to join in, but I'll give an overview of this. So our Massachusetts State Director, Natasha, is a part of a Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership where EdTrust partners with local organizations, advocacy organizations to form this partnership. And so they came together to create a tool to help folks. So we have all this information, we have best practices, et cetera, but this is actually a tool to help advocates and people, parents, people who care about what's going on in the schools to actually take some next steps. And so really quickly, I will put this link in the chat. But it's a really great resource because in it you can find what are questions to ask, what are questions to ask the district? Thank you, Natasha. What are questions to ask leaders? What are things that you should be looking for? And it's also divided by different topic areas. So it's a really great resource. I will say it's definitely focused on Massachusetts, but a lot of the questions and a lot of the things to consider are very relevant and transferable to other states. And we hope that there will be more resources like this that begin to pop up as well for other states. Did I get it everything, Natasha? I think so. All right, so this was a lot of information.
Audio now.
Oh, always, I feel like technology always likes to mess with us at the end of the day. And yes, you will receive both the recording as well as these resources and these links at the end of the session. And so you will get all this information. So that was a lot of information, and we wanted to just give, oh, I did forget there was one quick thing to plug, but until as Allison is checking her technology. So I did want to point out on our EdTrust webpage on strategies to solve unfinished learning, there are a few resources. One of them, and again, these links will be there, but we have 5 questions to ask districts about how they'll use the new funding to support students. So we have thought about what are 5 things that are important for families, stakeholders to ask to make sure that they are directing funds in the best way. There's also an action guide for targeting resources to address the specific needs of English learners. And then also on our unfinished learning website, you can send a letter to your district leaders about implementing best practices. So it's really like you can download it, add your name, and then send it away. And so we've done all the work for you there. So these are resources that we have available, tools that hopefully will help. And again, we're always looking to create more tools and support. And we hope that in the discussion, some of the things that bubble up are what are the things that are missing? What are the tools and resources that you all need moving forward? All right, so now I'll stop talking. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute or add a question in the chat. Everybody's so quiet. It's late for some of us. All right, so as promised, we're going to spend some time in breakout groups. So first I will go over the questions. These questions will be shared with you also when you go into the breakout groups, so you don't need to remember them right now. But really, we just want this to be a time for you all to get to know one another, to think about what is resonating from what you heard. It was a lot of information, but what are some of the things that are popping out for you? And also share a little bit about what's happening on the ground in your community, in your local school district. What are some of the barriers to change? And also what's working? Are there examples that you can share with others? And what are you kind of taking away from this discussion? So it's a lot of questions. We're going to give you about 20 minutes, maybe a little less, and to discuss. And how we're going to break you out, I've actually already put you all in rooms. And so once it pops up on your screen, there should be something that pops up that says enter this breakout room. And all you have to do is just enter the breakout room that you're assigned. But if you get lost, you can always come back to this main room and we'll put you in the right room. Group 1 is for Texas, 2, Louisiana, North Carolina, Washington, Kentucky, 3, California, New York, 4, Tennessee and Georgia, 5, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Delaware, 6, Ohio and Michigan, and group 7, all of our other wonderful state folks. And so are there any questions before we go into the groups? All right, so I'm going to open the rooms and we will see you back here in about 15-20 minutes. Hi, Lang. Yes. Which room do you need?
California for me.
Oh, yes. I don't think we've met yet, but
Yeah, I'm Lang. So good to meet you, Marissa.
nice to meet you. I will add you.
Sorry, I didn't register in advance, which is probably why.
Oh, no worries. Let me figure this out. I'm trying to figure out how to send you to a room. Is there a spot on your Zoom that says, is there a thing that says breakout rooms?
Surprisingly not. Yeah.
Let me figure this out. Oh, got you. Okay, assigning you now.
Thank you.
No problem. Danielle, are you there? I feel like you're probably,
Me?
no, Danielle. Actually, let me stop recording. Hold on one second. Hi, Cheryl, are you there? I think some folks are probably away from their computer. Couple more minutes, waiting on a few more folks. See lots of smiling faces, so hopefully that means there was some good conversation happening. I would love for two brave souls to share something that's not resonating, what's on your mind from your discussion. Someone whose birthday is in the next month.
I can go, but my birthday's in May. I had a wonderful conversation with Bonnie in Memphis. And one of my takeaways from that was that even if your state is providing funding for tutoring and summer programs and all of these different things, they're only as good as people's awareness about how to take advantage of that. And so, what I learned is that districts are going to have to also not only set these things up, but then make sure families take advantage of that. And so I think that's part of, as an EdTruster, I think we have to incorporate into our messaging is that the awareness and the ability of parents to take advantage of things is really, really important. So that's my takeaway. And I think Bonnie would agree. Good conversation. It was good to get to know a fellow Tennessean.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeannie.
And I'll share from our group. One thing that we talked about for an extended amount of time is that how not only was there academic unfinished learning, but there was also social, emotional unfinished learning that students are experiencing and how their behavior is currently in current school climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see in the chat too, compounding factors in the scale of the issue. And so, yeah, I think as you just said, is it Gabe?
Yes, it's Gabe.
Gabe, thank you for sharing. I think as you just said and in the chat, it's not just a test score. It is the academics and the social emotional, and it is teachers and principals and school buildings and a lot of things intersecting with one another. And the problem is challenging, but I'm very encouraged by just you all here today and knowing that we are not alone in this challenge and that there are many, many people like those of us in this room who are also hoping to tackle this issue, and that together we can start to build a better system for all of our kids. So with that, I am going to close this out unless anybody else was really excited to share anything. All right, and yes, staffing shortages for sure. That might be something we have to dig into in one of our next workshops. So thank you all so much for being here. The next couple slides, we're gonna close out. However, please, please, please do not shut your computer off before filling out this survey. We really do read every comment and really pay attention to what you say. And especially with this workshop, this is again, one of 6. And so we are directly going to use your feedback for how we can make this even better for the next go around. And so please, please, please fill out this quick little 5-minute survey. We'll also send this link out with the materials for the session. Again, all the links and everything we will send to you. And so with that, fill out the survey. And so I did just want to say right now we have planned, we're still working out the logistics of timing of everything, but over the next 6 months or so, we are going to be doing this workshop series. Today was really about setting the stage, kind of taking a diagnostic of where all of us are at. The next one, we're hoping to talk more about how schools, families, and communities can partner together. I saw some things in the chat around partnerships and relationships. Holding districts accountable for the use of funding and how they're using it, supporting social, emotional, and academic development, continuing to support student learning throughout the pandemic and beyond. And then our last one will be kind of synthesizing our learning. But like we said, we definitely want to make sure that these learning workshops are about addressing your needs. And so, you know, we might adjust or change some of these based off of the feedback that we're getting from you all. And so with that, thank you all so much. For the East Coasters, we know that this was late, but for the West Coasters, thank you for coming right after work. And we're just so ecstatic that you were here with us. Tell your friends, you will get an email. And so we hope that more folks come and that this is a time that we can really brainstorm and be together and help one another and support one another. So if you, I'm sure you got to meet several of our state leads. And so definitely get in contact with them. But also if you have questions or want to dig into any of these topics more, feel free to reach out to Kayla, Allison, or myself, and we'll make sure you get connected to the right person.
This was great news. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. And everybody enjoy your weekend. We're getting down a little early, so thank goodness. See you all later. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.